On the 29th of September, 1833, the royal palace of Madrid was silenced not by grief, but by the pathetic groans of Ferdinand VII, King of Spain. His body, a mere 48 years old, was ravaged by syphilis, a brutal, ironic end for a monarch who had embodied depravity. His raw, animalistic cries cut through the deathly silence, while desperate physicians wrestled with the putrid ulcers that consumed him. The irony was a bitter draught. The self-proclaimed defender of Catholic morality and Spanish tradition was being devoured from within by the very sins he so hypocritically condemned. How did Ferdinand VII descend into such a maelstrom of perversion, earning his place as arguably the most despised monarch in Spanish history? To understand this moral abyss, we must peel back the layers of a life steeped in scandal, a life that forever stained the Spanish crown. Ferdinand's story began on the 14th of October, 1784, born into a Spain that, despite its waning power, still clung to its imperial grandeur. As the son of Charles IV and Maria Luisa of Parma, he was heir to one of Europe's oldest dynasties. Yet, his upbringing was far from the virtuous environment one might expect for a future king. The royal nursery was less a cradle of nobility and more a hotbed of intrigue, where sexual dalliances, betrayals, and political machinations were the true currency of the court. His mother, Queen Maria Luisa, was infamous for her numerous lovers, a scandalous open secret that included the notorious Manuel Godoy, who wielded such immense influence that he practically governed Spain through his sway over the royal family. This atmosphere of moral decay, where illicit affairs and power plays were daily spectacles, laid the fertile ground for Ferdinand's own disturbing personality to blossom. From a tender age, Ferdinand displayed a chilling darkness that went beyond mere childish mischief. By the age of 10, his cruelty was undeniable, leaving those around him alarmed. Contemporary accounts paint a disturbing picture. He derived entertainment from torturing small animals, particularly cats, and took perverse pleasure in forcing servants into humiliating acts for his amusement. These early demonstrations of sadism were alarming to his tutors, who, in vain, attempted to curb his monstrous tendencies. However, their efforts were systematically thwarted. Any tutor who dared to challenge the young prince's insatiable whims or oppose his cruel desires was swiftly dismissed or transferred, reinforcing Ferdinand's belief that his position rendered him immune to consequence. His formal education, predictably, was a complete disaster. Unlike other European princes who endured rigorous intellectual training, Ferdinand showed absolutely no interest in scholarly pursuits. He actively rejected his studies, despised art and literature, and demonstrated a shocking ignorance about even the most basic matters of state. His mind, it seemed, was solely occupied with satisfying his most primal impulses. His only enduring passion during his youth was voyeurism and unsettling fascination with spying on the intimate activities of courtiers. He frequently ordered holes to be secretly made in the walls of palace chambers, allowing him to observe unsuspecting individuals, feeding a nascent obsession with illicit intimacy and control over the lives of others. This early fascination with peeping, rather than governance, was a stark prelude to the depravity that would define his reign. The transition from a disturbed prince to a tyrannical king began with his first marriage. In 1802, at the age of 18, Ferdinand married his cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples. This union was hoped to civilize him, to temper his wild nature with the responsibilities of a husband and future monarch. Instead, it had the opposite, devastating effect, unleashing a new level of torment. Intimate court reports, whispered and then documented in secret, chronicle how he subjected his young, educated, and religious wife to humiliating and degrading sexual practices that bordered on abuse. Maria Antonia was left deeply traumatized by her husband's cruelty, eventually retreating into a life of practical seclusion, desperate to avoid his company at all costs. The situation spiraled dramatically when Ferdinand discovered he could leverage his royal position to coerce women at court. He began systematically blackmailing ladies-in-waiting, threatening to ruin their families or accuse them of fabricated offenses if they refused to satisfy his perverse desires. Married women became a particular fixation. Their seduction, a perverse declaration of power not only over the women themselves but also as a form of dominance over their husbands. Many noblemen, caught in an impossible bind, were forced to silently accept the dishonor inflicted upon their wives to maintain their crucial positions and the welfare of their families at court. The shame and fear permeating the palace were palpable. In 1806, Maria Antonia died prematurely at the tender age of 21, her passing immediately shrouded in deep suspicion. Officially, tuberculosis was cited as the cause of death, but persistent rumors suggested she had been poisoned, or more plausibly, had simply died of heartbreak and physical exhaustion due to her husband's constant, relentless abuse. Ferdinand's reaction to her death was chillingly indifferent. He coldly remarked that he was now free to seek more interesting pleasures, a comment that horrified even hardened courtiers. The Napoleonic invasion of Spain in 1808 should have been a pivotal moment of national unity and resistance. Ferdinand, however, saw only opportunity for his own self-interest. During the mutiny of Aranjuez, which famously forced his father Charles IV's abdication, Ferdinand demonstrated an astonishing lack of courage. Instead of leading his people's resistance against the French invaders, he preferred to negotiate secretly with Napoleon, shamelessly offering to deliver Spain on a silver platter in exchange for personal guarantees for his safety and future. The infamous meeting in Bayonne between Ferdinand and Napoleon exposed the true, despicable nature of the future Spanish king. French witnesses, accustomed to dealing with various types of monarchs, were nonetheless appalled. They described Ferdinand as a pathetic and contemptible man who humbly begged the French emperor for favor, offering any concession imaginable to maintain his personal privileges. Napoleon himself, despite his cynical view of royalty, was profoundly unimpressed by Ferdinand's base character, later commenting that he had never known anyone so vile occupying a throne. During his forced exile at the Château de Valençay, Ferdinand lived years of luxurious idleness at Napoleon's expense. Instead of planning his country's liberation or reflecting on his failures, he dedicated himself entirely to carnal pleasures. He corrupted French servants, organized orgies with other Spanish exiles, and it was during this period that he contracted his first venereal disease from a local prostituta, foreshadowing of his ultimate demise. Letters intercepted by French spies revealed his constant requests for female entertainment and his utter indifference to the suffering of the Spanish people who were fighting and dying in his name. Ferdinand's triumphant return to Spain in 1814, following Napoleon's defeat, should have marked the beginning of a new, enlightened era for the nation. Instead, it brought only the brutal restoration of absolute tyranny and a deepening of royal depravity. One of his first and most telling actions was to re-establish the Spanish Inquisition, not from any genuine religious conviction, but because its tribunals granted him absolute, unquestioned power to persecute political enemies and, crucially, to blackmail vulnerable families. He shamelessly used accusations of heresy as leverage, forcing women to submit to his desires, promising forgiveness and an escape from the Inquisition's wrath in exchange for sexual favors. The lines between spiritual authority and carnal predation were horrifyingly blurred. His second marriage, in 1816, to Isabel of Braganza, was even more sordid than the first. Isabel, a Portuguese princess of only 19 years, was quite literally sold by her family to consolidate a political alliance. Ferdinand, now 32 years old and already visibly marked by a lifetime of debauchery, subjected his young wife to even worse abuse than that inflicted on Maria Antonia. The Spanish court, under Ferdinand VII, truly became a den of institutionalized corruption. He formalized a system of royal favors, where public positions, lucrative appointments, and political influence were explicitly granted to men willing to offer their wives or daughters for the king's pleasure. Ministers were chosen not for their competence or loyalty to the crown, but for the beauty and availability of their female family members. The king maintained an informal harem within the palace itself, with women officially listed as ladies, in waiting but serving exclusively to satisfy his escalating lust. Ferdinand's sexual practices were of a perversity that shocked even the notoriously relaxed standards of the era. Secret court documents, painstakingly discovered centuries later, reveal his obsessive compulsion for humiliating rituals and sadistic practices. He routinely forced his victims into degrading acts, often while being observed by other courtiers, transforming what should have been intimate moments into public spectacles for his sick amusement. The situation reached its lowest point with the death of Isabel of Braganza in 1818. Like his first wife, Isabel died young and under highly suspicious circumstances. Doctors reported that she showed signs of severe physical trauma and suffered from profound depression. Her last confessor, years later, revealed that she had expressed a desperate desire to die, to escape the unspeakable torments she suffered at her husband's hands. Ferdinand again showed complete indifference to his wife's death, marrying for the third time just months later. Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, his new victim, was only 20 years old when she was delivered to the depraved king. This marriage lasted a mere 2 years before she too died under mysterious conditions, increasing suspicions that Ferdinand was literally killing his wives through a combination of physical and psychological abuse. During the decade of the 1820s, Ferdinand reached the zenith of his depravity. He simultaneously maintained dozens of mistresses, a shocking roster that included nuns, whom he forced to break their sacred vows through blackmail and threats. He developed a particular and disturbing obsession with virgins, offering generous rewards to those who could bring him inexperienced young women. Desperate families, facing absolute misery and ruin, would heartbreakingly sell their daughters to the king, preferring dishonor to utter destitution. Meanwhile, Spain's political situation deteriorated rapidly under his disastrous reign. While Ferdinand indulged in every imaginable vice, the once vast Spanish Empire crumbled around him. American colonies declared independence one after another, severing centuries of ties. The economy collapsed, plunging Spanish society into chaos and widespread poverty. The king, however, remained utterly oblivious to the national problems, concerned only with satisfying his increasingly extreme appetites. His fourth and final marriage in 1829, to Maria Cristina of Bourbon II Sicilies, then 23, was a last, desperate act to produce an heir. Maria Cristina was the only one of his wives who managed to survive Ferdinand, but this was largely due to the fact that he was already gravely ill when they married. Syphilis, contracted in one of his countless adventures with prostitutes, had begun its relentless assault on his brain, slowly diminishing his capacity to cause further harm. Ferdinand's final years were a prolonged agony. The venereal disease slowly consumed his body, leaving him covered in repugnant ulcers, racked by constant pain, and suffering from progressive mental deterioration. His doctors, despite all their efforts, could not conceal the shameful, utterly deplorable nature of his condition. The court whispered openly about the king's truly deplorable state. He had become a pathetic spectacle of physical and moral decomposition, his body a living testament to his sins. At the end of September 1833, Ferdinand VII lay dying in his chambers, abandoned by almost everyone. His former victims had either died or fled. His courtiers avoided him due to the nauseating stench of his wounds, and even his doctors attended only out of professional obligation, performing their duties with grim detachment. The man who had once terrorized defenseless women was now utterly defenseless himself, consumed by his own depraved choices. Death finally came on the 29th of September, bringing an end to one of the most shameful reigns in European history. Ferdinand VII died as he had lived, in a sordid and despicable manner. There were no sincere tears at his funeral, only the palpable relief of a nation that finally found itself free of its torturer. His only legitimate daughter, the future Isabel II, inherited a ruined kingdom and a crown forever stained by her father's depravity. The legacy of Ferdinand VII is one of the darkest and most reviled in Spanish monarchy. During his 20 years of effective reign, he transformed Spain from what was still considered a great power into a backward and despised country. His obsession with carnal pleasures, his utter disregard for governance, and his monstrous cruelty cost the nation its dignity, its vast American colonies, and its once prominent position on the world stage. More than that, he established a terrible precedent of how absolute power can completely corrupt a human being, stripping away all semblance of humanity. Today, more than 2 centuries later, Ferdinand VII is remembered not as a king, but as a predator who used the crown to satisfy the lowest impulses of human nature. His story serves as a dark and chilling reminder that not even royal blood can protect someone from the horrifying consequences of a life dedicated to vice and cruelty. The most perverted king in Spanish history died as he deserved, alone, sick, and despised by all who knew him.